Hey everyone, tonight we're going somewhere a little higher up, a place with a much better view and a much shorter life expectancy. We're travelling to a city of floating gardens and towering pyramids, where the priests were sharper than their sermons and being the guest of honour was a terminal condition. Welcome to the great city of Tenochtitlan, where you have a very important, very personal and very, very final appointment at the top of the Templo Mayor. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, let your mind wander, and allow the gentle rhythm of my voice to lull you towards sleep. Maybe settle in, pull your blanket a little closer, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's begin with a simple, comforting fact. You would not have been a willing volunteer. The popular image of a noble Aztec warrior bravely marching up the temple steps, eager to meet the gods, is mostly a romantic myth. In reality, the vast majority of sacrificial victims were outsiders. They were prisoners of war, captured from rival city-states like Tlaxcala or Huexotzinco during the ritualized conflicts known as the Flower Wars. These weren't wars of conquest in the traditional sense. They were ceremonial battles fought with the express purpose of capturing warriors for the sacrificial altar. Think of it as the universe's most aggressive and non-negotiable recruitment drive. If you weren't a captured enemy, you might be a slave, purchased specifically for a certain festival. Or perhaps you were chosen as a tribute from a conquered territory, a living tax payment to keep the empire running and the gods satisfied. In some rarer, more specific ceremonies, even Aztecs could be chosen, but this was the exception. For the most part, you are here because you lost a fight somewhere else, and now your day is about to get significantly worse. Your journey to the pyramid begins not with reverence, but with the cold, hard reality of being a captive in a foreign city, surrounded by a language you don't understand and a populace that sees you not as a person, but as a divine meal. The streets of Tenochtitlan are a marvel of engineering, a sprawling metropolis built on a lake, with canals for roads and causeways connecting it to the mainland. It's beautiful, clean, and orderly. And none of that matters to you, because every perfectly swept street and floating Chinampa garden only leads you closer to the great twin pyramids at the city's heart, the Templo Mayor. One temple is dedicated to Tlaloc, the god of rain, and the other to Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird god of war and the sun. Your appointment is with the latter. Now, depending on the festival, your preparation for this final day could be surprisingly luxurious. For the festival of Toxcatl, one particularly handsome male captive was chosen a year in advance to live as the embodiment of the god Tezcatlipoca. For a full year, you would be a god on earth. You would be dressed in the finest embroidered cloaks, adorned with gold and feathers. You'd be taught to play the flute, carry flowers, and smoke tobacco with grace. You'd have 4 beautiful maidens as your companions, women who were themselves representations of goddesses. You would be paraded through the city, and people would bow and offer you gifts. You would live a life of perfect, pampered bliss. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? A year of being treated like a deity. But all along, you know exactly how it ends. Every perfect meal, every whispered song from your flute, every adoring glance from the crowd is just a tick of the clock counting down to the moment you ascend the temple steps and give it all back. On the final day, your divine companions would weep and leave you. You would be taken to a smaller temple outside the city, and as you climb the steps, you would break one of your flutes on each step, a symbolic shattering of your beautiful temporary life. This wasn't just a sacrifice. It was a year-long piece of psychological theatre, where the victim's own brief experience of divinity made the offering that much more potent. The beauty of the life you lived for a year was the point. You weren't just giving a body, you were giving up a perfect existence, a microcosm of everything the gods themselves could enjoy. But let's be honest, you probably weren't the chosen one for Toxcatl. You're more likely part of a large group of captives, queued up for a less glamorous but equally final ceremony. As you stand at the base of the Templo Mayor, the air is thick. It's a mix of cloying copal incense, the scent of thousands of unwashed bodies pressed together in the plaza, and another, sharper, metallic smell that you try very hard not to identify. The sound is a deafening roar, not the sound of a mob, but the sound of a congregation. There are drums, their deep rhythmic pulse echoing the heartbeat you can feel in your own throat. There are high-pitched whistles made from bone, and the deep, mournful howl of conch shell trumpets. The crowd chants in unison, a low, hypnotic hum that seems to make the very stones vibrate. And then you begin to climb. The steps of the Templo Mayor are steep, narrow, and deliberately designed to be difficult. You are forced to ascend sideways, unable to turn your back fully on the idol at the top or the crowd below. There are 114 steps, and with each one, the roar of the plaza recedes slightly, replaced by the pounding of the drums and the whoosh of the wind. Your legs burn, your heart pounds. You're being pushed forward by the priests, and you can see the line of others ahead of you, a grim procession against the bright blue sky. You can't see the top clearly until you're almost there, and when you finally reach the summit, the view is breathtaking. The entire city of Tenochtitlan stretches out below you, a jewel in the center of Lake Texcoco. You can see the snow-capped volcanoes in the distance. It is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen, and it is the last. At the top of the pyramid, the scene is one of organized, ritualized chaos. The platform is stained dark. Priests, their long hair matted with dried blood from previous sacrifices and their bodies painted black, move with a practiced efficiency. They are not frenzied, they're focused. This is not an act of rage, it is their job. 4 priests take hold of you, 1 for each limb. They are strong, their grip like iron. You're stretched backwards over a low convex stone, the teponazli. Your back is arched, pushing your chest upward toward the sun. For a brief, terrifying moment, you're staring straight up at the sky. The sun a blinding white eye. A 5th priest, the most senior, stands over you. He holds a knife, but it's not a metal knife. It's made of obsidian, volcanic glass sharpened to a molecule-thin edge, far sharper than any steel. He speaks, but you don't hear the words. You only hear the drums. The Aztec believed that the universe was in a constant, precarious balance. The sun god, Huitzilopochtli, had to battle the forces of darkness every single night to rise again in the morning. This cosmic struggle required energy, and that energy came from human life, specifically the heart and blood, which they called Chalchihuatl, or precious water. Without these offerings the sun would die, the world would be plunged into eternal darkness, and all of creation would end. Your sacrifice in their eyes was not an act of cruelty. It was a necessary, vital, and profoundly sacred duty to keep the universe running. You are not being murdered, you are feeding a god. You're preventing the apocalypse. This is, of course, very little comfort as you lie on the stone. The senior priest raises the obsidian blade. The act itself is swift, a testament to long practice. A single, precise movement. Your heart, now considered a divine offering, is held up to the sun, a steaming tribute to the god. The steam rising from it was believed to be the spirit's essence ascending to the heavens. What happens next is where things get even less pleasant, if that were possible. Your body, now an empty vessel, is rolled down the steep temple steps, tumbling and bouncing until it comes to a rest at the base. Down in the plaza, other priests would take the body. Depending on the ritual and the victim, different things could happen. The head might be severed and placed on a zompantli, a massive skull rack that stood in the plaza. These racks were not just gruesome decorations, they were public records, a chillingly effective display of the Empire's power and piety, holding thousands of skulls at a time. The limbs might be given to the warrior who captured you. He might take them home for a ritual feast, a form of sacred cannibalism where it was believed that consuming the flesh of a brave enemy allowed the warrior to absorb his strength and courage. It was a holy communion, not a barbecue. Your skin could even be flayed and worn by a priest for 20 days in a ceremony honouring the god Zep-Totec, the flayed lord, a deity of agriculture and rebirth. The priest wearing your skin symbolised the earth putting on a new layer of vegetation in the spring. You became a walking, horrifying metaphor for seasonal renewal, and it's important to remember that heart extraction was just the most common method. The Aztecs had a diverse and creative portfolio of sacrificial rites. Some prisoners were tied to a large stone and made to fight in gladiatorial-style combat against fully armed Aztec warriors. They were given a mock weapon, perhaps a club studded with feathers instead of obsidian blades, and expected to defend themselves. It was a slow, theatrical death for the entertainment of the masses and the honour of the gods. In ceremonies for the rain god Tlaloc, children were sometimes sacrificed. Their tears were believed to be a good omen, promising a wet season and a bountiful harvest. The more the children cried on their way to the shrine, the more rain was expected to fall. For Huehueteotl, the old fire god, victims might be drugged with a psychedelic fungus and then thrown into a great bonfire. Before they died, they would be pulled out with hooks, and their still beating hearts would be cut out and offered to the flames. So, let's recap your journey. You've been captured in a ritual war, marched to a foreign city, possibly pampered for a year only to have it all ripped away, then forced up 114 steps to a platform of priests with a blood-matted hairdo. You've been stretched over a stone, had a very important out-of-body experience involving an obsidian knife, and then your earthly vessel was tumbled down a pyramid to be dismembered. Your head is now a decoration on a public skull rack, and a priest might be wearing your skin as a ceremonial poncho for the next 3 weeks. It's safe to say survival was not high on the agenda, and even if, by some impossible miracle, you managed to escape the priests, dodge the skull collectors, and flee the city, you're still in the middle of a powerful, hostile empire in the 15th century. Your chances of making it home are, to put it mildly, statistically insignificant. You simply would not survive. To truly understand how you ended up on that stone, we need to talk about the supply chain. Sacrifices on this scale required a steady, reliable source of offerings, and the Aztec Empire had perfected a unique and chillingly elegant solution: the Xochitl, or flower wars. These weren't the brutal, chaotic battles for territory that other empires fought. Instead, they were prearranged, highly ritualized conflicts between the Aztec Triple Alliance, and their rival city-states like Tlaxcala. Think of it as the most macabre sporting event in history, where the trophy was a trip to the Templo Mayor. The rules were strangely civilized. The two sides would agree on a time and a sacred battlefield, known as a Cuauhtlali. The goal wasn't to annihilate the enemy or seize their land, it was simply to capture as many able-bodied warriors as possible. Killing on the battlefield was considered clumsy and inefficient. The real prize was a living, breathing captive who could be presented to the gods in his full strength and vitality. For the warriors involved, the flower wars were a path to social advancement and honor. An Aztec warrior who captured an enemy, especially a high-ranking one, earned immense prestige, feathers for his headdress, and promotions within the military hierarchy. For the captive, the path was more complex. If a warrior was captured, he was expected to face his fate with courage and dignity. To struggle or show fear was to bring shame upon himself and his city. A brave captive who walked to the sacrificial stone without flinching was believed to earn a glorious afterlife, joining the sun god in his daily journey across the sky. They were, in a sense, immortalized. This belief system created a strange shared code of honor between mortal enemies. The captor respected the captive's bravery, and the captive accepted his sacred role. Of course, it's much easier to appreciate a code of honor when you're not the one being turned into a divine hors d'oeuvre. The Flower Wars were a perfectly balanced engine of death and glory, a system that kept the Empire's military sharp, its social structure rigid, and its gods well fed, all while maintaining a veneer of sacred purpose. Now let's step down from the pyramid for a moment and stand with the crowd in the plaza. What did the average Aztec citizen, the farmer, the artisan, the merchant think of all this? Were they horrified? Repulsed? The answer, almost certainly, is no. For them, a mass sacrifice was not a scene of terror. It was a moment of profound cosmic and civic importance. It was part religious festival, part national holiday, and part Super Bowl of piety. The spectacle reinforced their identity as the chosen people of Huitzilopochtli, the guardians of the sun. Every beat of the drum, every chant, every offering was a collective act of faith that kept their world from collapsing into darkness. It was a visceral, terrifying, and deeply unifying experience. Imagine the sheer sensory overload, the vibrant colours of the priestly vestments and warrior costumes, the hypnotic rhythm of the music, the thick clouds of incense, and the awesome, terrible sight of the Great Pyramid itself, the centre of their universe, fulfilling its sacred function. This wasn't just a passive viewing experience. The festivals that accompanied sacrifices were deeply participatory. There was feasting, dancing, and the ritual consumption of pulque, an alcoholic beverage made from the maguey plant. The entire social order was reaffirmed. The emperor and the high priests were seen performing their most vital duty. The warriors displayed their prowess through the captives they brought, and the common people participated by bearing witness, their collective belief giving power to the ritual. The distribution of sacrificed flesh, reserved for the elite, was also a part of this social fabric, a communion that bound the ruling class to the gods they served. To the Aztec populace, the cries of the victims were not cries of suffering, but voices speaking to the gods. The blood flowing down the temple steps was not a river of gore, but the precious water that nourished the earth and the sun. They were participating in the preservation of reality itself. It was a brutal theology, but it was their theology, and it gave their world meaning, order, and a powerful, unifying sense of purpose. This entire worldview, so logical and necessary to the Aztecs, would soon collide with another, one that saw their sacred duty as the work of the devil himself. When the Spanish conquistadors under Hernán Cortés arrived in Tenochtitlan in 1519, they were stunned by what they found. They saw a city larger and cleaner than any in Europe, an architectural marvel of floating islands and grand temples. But when they were shown the Templo Mayor, their awe turned to absolute horror. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Cortés' soldiers, wrote about it later with a shudder. He described the walls of the shrine caked with blood, the air thick with the stench of a slaughterhouse, and the great statues of the gods adorned with offerings of human hearts. He saw the Azompantli, the skull rack, and tried to count the skulls, estimating over 100,000, a monument to a faith built on death. To the Catholic Spanish, this was not religion. It was Satanism. They saw the Aztec gods as demons, the priests as hellish servants, and the entire practice as an abomination that had to be wiped from the face of the earth. There was no room for cultural understanding or theological debate. The Spanish, who were themselves no strangers to public executions, burnings at the stake, and the brutalities of the Inquisition, were genuinely and profoundly scandalized. This moral revulsion became a powerful justification for their conquest. They weren't just seeking gold and glory. They were on a divine mission to save souls from a demonic cult, even if it meant destroying the civilization that hosted it. This clash of belief systems was total and irreconcilable. The Aztecs were feeding the sun to save the world. The Spanish were destroying a nest of devils to save the world. Both sides believed they were agents of cosmic good, and in that catastrophic misunderstanding, an entire world was set ablaze. The end came swiftly and with unimaginable violence. After being initially welcomed, the Spanish were driven from Tenochtitlan, but they returned in 1521 with a vengeance and, more importantly, with thousands of indigenous allies, including the Tlaxcalans, who were all too eager to see their ancient Aztec enemies fall. The siege of Tenochtitlan was brutal. The Spanish cut the causeways, blockaded the city, and a smallpox epidemic, accidentally introduced by the Europeans, ravaged the population, killing far more than any blade. When the city finally fell, the era of Aztec sacrifice was over. The conquistadors, in their zeal, smashed the idols, toppled the temples, and built a cathedral on the ruins of the Templo Mayor, a literal and symbolic replacement of one faith with another. The priests were killed or scattered. The skull racks were torn down. The sacred rituals that had governed the cosmos for centuries were outlawed, punishable by death. The abrupt end of the sacrificial system was a psychological catastrophe for the Aztec survivors. For generations they had been taught that their offerings were the only thing keeping the sun in the sky, and now the offerings had stopped. Yet the sun continued to rise. Every morning the dawn was a silent, confusing refutation of their entire worldview. Their gods had been defeated, their cosmic purpose rendered meaningless. It was a spiritual devastation from which they would never recover. And so, the great bloody engine of the Aztec faith ground to a halt. The flower wars ceased. The obsidian knives were laid down, and the terrible heartbeat of the temple drums was silenced forever. The world the Aztecs knew had ended, not with the cosmic darkness they had feared, but was the arrival of pale, bearded men on strange beasts carrying new weapons, a new god, and an unshakable certainty that their own form of violence was the only one that was holy. The sun rises hot and white over the mud-brick walls of Ur, and long before the great ziggurat casts its tallest shadow, your day has already begun. You're not a king, nor a scribe, nor a priest who communes with the heavens. You are something far more essential to the rhythm of daily life in ancient Sumer. You are a brewer, and in a world where the water from the river can make you sick, your work is not just a craft. It's a form of public health, a currency, and a sacred art all fermented into one. Your name is Ilani, and your hands, though stained with grain and sticky with date honey, are respected. For you are a follower in the path of Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, she who was born of sparkling fresh water, and your work is to turn bread into liquid joy. Your brewery is not a gleaming factory of steel tanks. It's a humble, open-air courtyard attached to the great temple complex. The air already smells of damp earth, baking bread, and the sweet yeasty tang of fermentation. Your first task of the day is not to brew, but to prepare the foundation of all Sumerian beer, bapir, the beer bread. You take coarsely ground barley and emmer wheat, mixing it with water and perhaps a little honey or crushed dates to form a hard dry dough. This isn't a soft, fluffy loaf meant for a meal. It is baked twice, until it becomes a rock-hard, shelf-stable brick of concentrated grain. This process preserves the barley, preventing it from spoiling in the Mesopotamian heat. The bapir is your stored potential, the very soul of the beer waiting to be awakened. You spend the early morning hours mixing, kneading, and shaping these loaves. Your movements are practiced rhythmic dance passed down through generations of brewers, many of them women like yourself. The temple scribes may record the king's decrees, but you are recording flavour in a language older than cuneiform. Once the bapir loaves are baked and cooled, the real magic begins. You take several of the hard loaves and break them into pieces, placing them into a large clay vat. The vat is enormous, almost as tall as you are, its surface smoothed by years of use. Now comes the water, hauled in heavy jars from a dedicated temple well, cleaner than the water from the canals where the city's life and waste intermingle. You pour the water over the broken bapir, and the sound of it hitting the clay is a welcome coolness in the rising heat. The bread begins to soften, slowly dissolving and turning the water into a thick, cloudy gruel. This is the mash. To this you add more grain, this time malted barley that has been allowed to sprout, which contains the natural enzymes needed to convert starches into fermentable sugars. This is the secret knowledge of the brewer, understanding how one type of grain can unlock the spirit of another. You stir the mash with a long wooden paddle, a slow, arduous process that requires strength and patience. The mixture is heavy, a porridge-like substance that will soon become something divine. As you stir, you might chant a quiet verse from the hymn to Ninkasi, not just as a prayer, but as a recipe and a reminder of your sacred duty. Ninkasi, you are the one who handles the dough with a big shovel, mixing in a pit, the bapir with sweet aromatics. You're not just mixing ingredients, you are performing a ritual, coaxing the life force out of the grain. Once the mash is thoroughly mixed, you leave it. Now the invisible gods of fermentation begin their work. Wild yeast from the air, from the surface of the clay vat, and from the grain itself begins to consume the sugars, releasing alcohol and carbon dioxide. The vat begins to bubble and foam, a slow, gentle simmer that is the sign of Ninkasi's presence. It is alive. While one vat is fermenting, you attend to another that is ready for the next stage. Sumerian beer was not the clear, filtered beverage we know today. It was thick, cloudy, and full of bread fragments, husks, and other solids. It was less like a modern lager and more like a drinkable, alcoholic porridge. To make it palatable, it needed to be strained. You take large pieces of woven cloth or reed mats and use them to filter the liquid from one vat to another, a slow and messy process. The goal is to separate the liquid beer from the solid dregs. What's left behind, a sodden mass of spent grain, is not wasted. It's a nutrient-rich food that can be given to the temple's livestock. In the cyclical world of Sumer, nothing is truly lost. The filtered beer is now ready for a final touch: flavouring. Hops were unknown in ancient Mesopotamia, so brewers like you had to be creative. You might stir in a generous amount of date honey, creating a sweet, strong beer reserved for religious festivals or the king's table. Or perhaps you'd add a mixture of herbs and spices, a secret recipe known only to your temple, to create a beer with a unique aromatic profile. There were many types of beer in Sumer, each with its own name and purpose. There was dark beer, light beer, strong beer, and sweet beer. The rations for a common labourer would be a weaker, more watery brew, while a high priest might enjoy a rich flavoured vintage. You, as the brewer, are the master of this diverse liquid menu, the keeper of tastes that define the social and religious life of the city. One of your most important duties is managing the temple's inventory, for beer was not just a drink, it was a form of payment. The hundreds of labourers building the ziggurat, these scribes keeping the records, the soldiers guarding the walls, they are all paid in daily rations of bread and beer. Cuneiform tablets, the world's oldest spreadsheets, meticulously record these payments. A standard worker might receive one siller, about a litre of beer per day. A higher-ranking official might receive 3 or 4. Your vats are, in essence, the temple's treasury, and you are its manager. You oversee the distribution, ensuring that every worker receives their liquid wage. Your role connects you to every facet of the city's life. The beer you make today will pay the man who is building the goddess Inanna's shrine tomorrow. As midday approaches, the heat becomes oppressive. The stone floors of the courtyard are hot to the touch. This is a time for rest, for seeking shade. But soon the city will stir again, and the taverns will open. While you work in a sacred context, much of the city's beer is consumed in these loud, bustling public houses. Taverns in Sumer were often run by women, and they were the centres of social life. Here, a farmer might celebrate a good harvest, a merchant might seal a deal over a shared jar of beer, or a soldier might gamble away his pay playing games of chance. The beer was served in large ceramic jars, and drinkers would sip it through long straws, often made of reed or even precious metals like copper or gold. These straws were not a novelty, they were a necessity, designed to bypass the layer of bread fragments and yeast floating on the surface of the unfiltered brew. Drinking was a communal activity, a way of forging bonds and sharing stories. Your work, however, is not yet done. The evening brings a new set of tasks. Cleaning the vats is a laborious but essential job. Any residue left behind could spoil the next batch. You scrub the heavy clay pots with sand and water, your arms aching from the day's labour. You check on the fermenting vats, listening to their gentle bubbling, judging their progress by smell and sight. You prepare the ingredients for the next day, ensuring the bapir is ready, the malted grain is measured, and the date honey is stored away from insects. Yours is a cycle that never truly ends, much like the cycle of the seasons and the rivers that give your land life. As the sun finally sets, casting a deep orange glow on the zaxing tiers of the ziggurat, your day's work comes to a close. The temple grows quiet, the sounds of chanting and commerce fading into the night. You might take a small cup of the day's freshest brew for yourself, a well-earned reward. You drink it slowly, not through a straw, but letting the thick liquid coat your tongue. It tastes of the earth, of the sun-baked barley, of the sweet dates from the palm groves. It is the taste of civilization itself. You look out over the city, a constellation of small fires and oil lamps beginning to twinkle in the dusk. You are not a king, and your name will not be written in the great epics. But in thousands of homes and on the lips of thousands of workers, the fruit of your labour brings sustenance, comfort, and a moment of joy in a harsh and unforgiving world. You are the brewer of and you have once again fulfilled your sacred duty to the goddess and her thirsty people. The profession of a brewer, while respected, is not without its anxieties. Your livelihood, and indeed the temple's liquid treasury, depends on a process that is part science and part prayer. A single misstep can lead to disaster. One of your constant worries is spoilage. In the oppressive heat of Mesopotamia, a batch of beer can turn sour overnight. An unseen contamination, a change in temperature, or simply bad luck could transform a vat of valuable, sweet-smelling mash into a foul, acidic waste. The smell is unmistakable. A sharp vinegar tang that stings the nostrils and signals a complete loss. When this happens, there is no remedy. The entire batch must be discarded, poured out onto the thirsty earth, a silent offering to the gods of misfortune. It means wasted grain, wasted labour, and a deficit in the temple's accounts that you, as the chief brewer, must answer for to the priests. Then there are the pests. The storehouses where the barley and bapir are kept must be vigilantly protected from weevils and rodents. A small infestation can decimate months of stored grain. You rely on well-built clay silos and the temple's cats, sleek and watchful hunters who patrol the granaries as their own sacred duty. During the fermentation process, the sweet, open vats attract swarms of insects. You cover them with woven reed mats, not just to keep out dust, but to protect the precious liquid from unwanted guests. Every step is a small battle against the forces of decay and chaos, a constant effort to maintain the purity of Ninkasi's creation. And beyond the natural world, there are the laws of men. Though the famous Code of Hammurabi would be written centuries after your time in Ur, the legal principles it codified were already taking root. Laws concerning fair trade and honest measures were paramount. A tavern keeper who served a short measure of beer or overcharged her customers could face severe penalties, even death by drowning according to some later laws. As the temple's brewer, you are responsible for the initial measure. The rations you distribute to the workers must be exact. You use standardized ceramic jars and make careful markings on a clay tablet for every distribution, your own form of cuneiform accounting. Your reputation, and that of the temple, rests on your honesty. A whisper of cheating could be more damaging than a spoiled batch of beer. Let's return to the tavern, the Eshdam, as the sun begins to dip lower, painting the city in hues of purple and orange. This is where your creation truly comes to life, not as currency, but as community. The tavern is a long, low-ceilinged room, its mud brick walls keeping the interior cool. The air is thick with the smell of beer, roasted barley and human sweat. It's loud, filled with the boisterous laughter of off-duty soldiers, the haggling of merchants who have travelled from distant lands like Dilmun in the Persian Gulf, and the quiet gossip of farmers. The alewife, the woman who runs the establishment, moves through the crowd with a practised authority. She is both a hostess and a peacekeeper, quick to break up a dispute or refill a jar for a thirsty patron. You watch as a group of builders, their bodies lean and powerful from a day spent hauling bricks for the ziggurat, gather around a large ceramic jar. They plunge their long reed straws into the brew, each man finding his own space. They do not drink in silence. They talk of their work, their families, the latest rumours from the palace. The beer loosens their tongues and eases the aches in their muscles. In another corner, a merchant from a far-off land negotiates with a local lapis lazuli craftsman. They share a smaller, more refined jar of sweet date-flavoured beer. Their straws, made of polished copper, glint in the lamplight. Their deal is sealed not with a handshake, but with a shared drink, a gesture of trust and mutual respect that transcends language. The tavern is the city in miniature, a place of commerce, of friendship, of fleeting arguments and lasting bonds, all of it lubricated by the liquid bread you painstakingly craft each day. But the ultimate destination for your finest work is not the tavern, nor the worker's ration jar. It is the temple itself. For a high festival honouring the moon god Nana, the patron deity of Yer, you are tasked with creating a special brew, a beer of unparalleled quality fit for the god himself. For this, you use only the finest ingredients, the best bapir, the sweetest date honey, and a secret blend of spices. The process is slower, more deliberate. You oversee every step with an almost prayerful intensity. When the beer is finally fermented and filtered, its aroma is intoxicating, rich and complex. You pour the beer into a special vessel, a beautiful alabaster jar with carved inscriptions praising Ninkasi and Nana. You carry it yourself, your heart a nervous drum, into the inner sanctum of the temple. This is a place few are allowed to enter. The air is cool and heavy with the scent of cedarwood smoke and old magic. You approach the altar where the high priest is waiting. He takes the jar from you, his expression solemn. He will pour out the first libation, a symbolic offering to quench the thirst of the god. The rest will be consumed by the priests and priestesses during the festival's most sacred rites. In this moment, you're more than a crafter of beverages. You're a vital link in the chain connecting the mortal world to the divine. Your work is an act of devotion, a transformation of earthly grain into a substance worthy of heaven. As you back away and leave the sanctum, a sense of profound peace settles over you. The city may depend on your beer for its wages and its laughter, but the gods depend on it for their worship, and in ancient Sumer there is no higher calling. In the quiet mountainous landscape of medieval Korea, death was not an ending. It was a meticulously managed transition, a final, profound duty that the living owed to the dead, and a cosmic transaction that could determine the fortune of a family for generations to come. The process of burial was not a simple act of interment. It was a rich and complex tapestry woven from the threads of Buddhist philosophy, shamanistic tradition, and most powerfully a strict Confucian code of filial piety that governed every gesture, every tear, and every grain of dirt placed upon the grave. To bury the dead in medieval Korea was to engage in a sacred conversation with the past, the present, and the uncertain future, a conversation that required patience, precision, and an almost supernatural attention to detail. During the Goryeo dynasty, which ruled the peninsula from 918 to 1392, the prevailing wind of faith was Buddhism. For centuries its teachings on impermanence and the cycle of rebirth, or samsara, shaped how Koreans viewed the body after death. If the physical form was merely a temporary vessel for a soul destined for another life, then clinging to it was a form of attachment, an obstacle to enlightenment. Consequently, cremation was the preferred method of burial, especially for the aristocracy and the royal family. This was not a grim, industrial process. A Goryeo cremation was a deeply spiritual event. The body would be placed on a funeral pyre, often at a temple nestled in the mountains. Monks would chant sutras, their low rhythmic voices mingling with the crackle of the flames, guiding the spirit of the deceased on its journey. The fire was seen as a purifying force, releasing the soul from its earthly shell. After the flame subsided, the family would return to perform the solemn task of collecting the remaining bone fragments. This was done with reverence, using long bamboo tongs. The whitened pieces of bone, the last physical remnants of a loved one, were carefully placed into an urn, and these were no simple clay pots. Goryeo was the golden age of Celadon pottery, and funerary urns were often masterpieces of the art form. They were elegant vessels glazed in a subtle, ethereal blue-green that seemed to capture the colour of the sky after a storm. Some were simple and graceful, others were intricately decorated with carved lotuses, clouds, or cranes, all symbols of purity, heaven, and longevity. These urns, containing the essence of the deceased, would then be buried in a small, well-chosen spot, often on a mountainside with a peaceful view. Sometimes multiple urns from the same family would be placed together, creating a communal resting place. For the people of Goryeo, the spirit was eternal, but the body was transient, and the Celadon urn was the beautiful final vessel for a life that had dissolved back into the cosmos. But by the late 14th century, a new dynasty, the Joseon, rose to power, and with it came a dramatic and forceful shift in philosophy. The Joseon rulers adopted Neo-Confucianism as the state ideology, and its principles would radically reshape Korean society, from the king's court down to the humblest farming village. And no aspect of life, or death, was more affected than burial customs. Confucianism placed paramount importance on filial piety, or hyo, the sacred duty of respect and service that a child owed to their parents. This duty did not end at death. In fact, it became even more profound. The body was seen as a precious inheritance from one's parents, a physical legacy to be cared for throughout life, and most importantly, preserved intact after death. To burn the body, to cremate it, was now seen as a horrific act of filial impiety, a desecration of the sacred vessel given to you by your ancestors. The Joseon government actively suppressed cremation, branding it a barbaric and unfilial practice. Thus, burial in the earth became the only acceptable method. And it was not to be a simple affair. It was a long, elaborate and expensive process governed by a labyrinth of rules laid out in Confucian texts like the Jujia Zali, family rituals of Jushi. The moment a parent died, a period of intense and highly structured mourning began. The eldest son, as the chief mourner, had the most important role. The body would be washed, dressed in fine grave clothes, and placed in the main hall of the house. A screen would be set up around it, and for 3, 5, or sometimes even 7 days, the family would keep a constant vigil. This was a time for ritualized wailing. The sounds of grief were not suppressed. They were an expected and necessary expression of loss and respect. Family members would don simple, coarse mourning clothes made of undyed hemp, a stark contrast to their usual colourful silks. The quality and type of mourning attire depended on one's relationship to the deceased, a complex dress code of sorrow. While the family mourned, other preparations were underway. A master craftsman would be summoned to build the coffin, usually from thick pine planks, chosen for their durability and resinous aroma. The coffin was built with incredible precision, using interlocking joints rather than nails. Inside, it might be lined with soft fabric, and precious personal items could be placed alongside the deceased. a favourite book for a scholar, an inkstone, or a simple piece of jewellery. The goal was to provide a comfortable and dignified final resting place. Simultaneously, another, even more crucial task was taking place, the selection of the gravesite. In Joseon Korea, choosing a burial plot was less like real estate and more like cosmic acupuncture. You had to find the one perfect spot on the earth that would ensure the peace of the ancestor and the prosperity of their descendants. This was the domain of Pungsu, the Korean practice of geomancy, or feng shui. The family would hire a professional geomancer, a jigwan, a man who could read the hidden energies of the landscape. The jigwan would spend days, sometimes weeks, surveying the surrounding mountains and rivers. The ideal site, known as a myeongdang or bright spot, had to meet a specific set of criteria. It needed a protective mountain to its back, like a great armchair. It needed smaller, embracing hills on its left and right, known as the Blue Dragon and the White Tiger. It needed an open view to the front and a gently flowing stream nearby to collect and hold the auspicious energy, or GI. The shape of the mountains, the direction of the water, the type of soil, every detail was scrutinized. A well-chosen site could bring wealth, health, and high-ranking government positions to the family for generations. A poorly chosen one, however, could bring bankruptcy, illness, and ruin. This belief placed immense pressure on the chief mourner. The future of his entire lineage rested on finding the right patch of earth. Stories abound in Korean folklore of families who rose to greatness or fell into destitution based on the power of their ancestors' graves. Once the propitious spot was identified, and the auspicious day and hour for burial were determined by astrologers, the funeral procession would begin. This was a great public spectacle, a final journey for the deceased through the world of the living. The coffin was placed on a large ornate funeral bier, or sangyeo, which was often decorated with colourful paintings of dragons, phoenixes and lotus flowers, and topped with a small spirit house. Dozens of men chanting a low, mournful song would carry the heavy bier on their shoulders. A man would walk at the front ringing a bell to clear the way and guide the spirit. He was followed by another carrying a banner inscribed with the name and titles of the deceased. The immediate family, led by the eldest son, would follow directly behind the bier, their faces etched with grief, still clad in their rough hemp clothes. Relatives and friends would follow, the long procession winding its way slowly from the family home, through the village, and up into the mountains. At the gravesite, the final rituals were performed. The coffin was carefully lowered into the earth. The chief mourner would avert his eyes at the moment of interment, a sign of his unbearable grief. He would then be the first to throw a handful of dirt onto the coffin. After the grave was filled, a large hemispherical mound of earth, called a bongbun, was built over it. This mound was then covered with turf to prevent erosion. At the foot of the mound, a simple stone table or altar was placed for offerings, and sometimes a small stone tablet inscribed with the deceased's details. But the son's duty was far from over. In fact, his most difficult trial was just beginning. For the most devout followers of Confucian ethics, the mourning period, or sangye, would last for up to 3 years. The eldest son was expected to build a small, simple hut, a yomak, beside the grave of his parent. He would live there, in near total isolation, for the entire period. His existence was one of extreme asceticism. He would continue to wear the coarse hemp clothing, sleep on a straw mat with a block of wood for a pillow, and eat only simple, bland food like rice gruel. He was to abstain from meat, alcohol, and the company of his wife. His days were structured around mourning. Twice a day, at dawn and at dusk, he would go to the grave mound to wail, offer fresh food and wine to the spirit of his parent, and ensure the gravesite was clean and well maintained. This practice, known as simyosari, was the ultimate demonstration of filial piety. It was a public and private performance of grief and devotion that consumed years of a man's life. It was physically grueling and emotionally draining, but it brought immense honour to the family. A man who completed the 3-year mourning period was praised as a paragon of virtue. While this extreme practice was usually reserved for the scholarly elite, or yangban, all families were expected to observe a period of mourning and perform ancestral rites, known as jisa. The burial was not a farewell. It was the transformation of a family member into a venerated ancestor. The dead were believed to remain a part of the family, their spirits watching over their descendants from the other world. On the anniversary of the parent's death, and on major holidays like the Lunar New Year and Chuseok, the harvest festival, the family would gather, either at the gravesite or at home before a memorial tablet. They would prepare an elaborate table of offerings: rice, soup, fruits, meats, and wine, all arranged in a specific ritualized pattern. The family members, dressed in fine clothes, would bow deeply before the altar, offering the food and wine to the ancestral spirits and asking for their continued blessing and protection. This tradition of jisa has continued in Korea for centuries and is still practiced by many families today, a living link to the Confucian worldview that shaped the nation. The dead, in Korea, are never truly gone. They're simply waiting for dinner. The first thing you notice upon waking is the smoke. It hangs in the air of the longhouse, a thick, hazy blanket that catches the single pale column of morning light filtering down from the smoke hole in the roof. It smells of burning peat, of sleeping bodies, of damp wool, and of the livestock who shared this space with your family through the long, cold night. You are 10 years old, your name is Astrid, and your world is this long, narrow hall, a universe of timber, thatch, and fire. There is no gentle awakening here, no parent softly calling your name. The cold seeping up from the earthen floor is your alarm clock, and the low, impatient bleating of a goat is your first summons to duty. In the Viking Age, childhood was not a period of play and leisure. It was an apprenticeship for survival, and your chores began the moment your eyes opened. Your first task, before even a thought of breakfast, is the fire. The central hearth is the beating heart of the longhouse. It is the sole source of heat against the biting Scandinavian cold, the only light in the windowless gloom, and the place where every meal is cooked. Last night, your father carefully banked the embers with ash to keep them alive. Now, it is your job to gently resurrect them. You kneel on the packed earth, your small hands carefully scraping away the ash to reveal the faint orange glow within. You add small, dry twigs, blowing softly, patiently, until a tiny flame flickers to life. Then you add larger pieces of peat or wood, carefully building the fire into a steady, reliable blaze. To let the fire die out would be more than an inconvenience. It would be a disaster, a sign of carelessness that your family could not afford. The warmth that begins to spread from the hearth is your first accomplishment of the day. While the fire grows, your older brother Björn has his own set of morning duties. If it is deep winter, some of the most valuable livestock, a milk cow, a few sheep or goats, have been brought inside to share the longhouse's warmth. This saved them from freezing, but it also meant their waste now decorated the floor at one end of the hall. Bjorn's job is to muck it out, shoveling the dung into a wooden bucket and carrying it outside to the midden heap. It's a smelly, thankless task, but essential for keeping the living space even remotely hygienic. The dung in turn will be used as fertilizer for the fields in the spring. In the Viking world, nothing was ever truly waste. Meanwhile, one of your own tasks is to fetch water. You take 2 heavy wooden buckets and head out into the crisp morning air. The journey is to a nearby stream. Its water so cold it makes your fingers ache. You fill the buckets, the weight of them making you stagger on the walk back. This water will be used for everything. For the porridge that will soon be bubbling over the fire, for the small amount of washing your family will do, and for the animals. You will make this trip several times before the day is over. With the fire lit and water fetched, the domestic rhythm of the longhouse begins, and your work is central to it. Your mother hands you a small leather pouch of barley. Your task is to grind it into flour for the day's flatbread. You kneel before the quernstone, a heavy flat circular stone with another smaller stone on top. You pour the grain into a hole in the top stone and begin to turn it, a repetitive grinding motion that requires all of your upper body strength. The stone is heavy and the work is slow. The gritty sound of stone on stone fills your corner of the longhouse. It's monotonous, tiring work, but the coarse grey flour that trickles out from between the stones is the foundation of your family's diet. While you grind, your mother might be tending to the large iron cauldron that hangs over the hearth, stirring a simple porridge of grains and water, which will be the morning meal for the entire family. After the grinding is done, your day's work shifts to the most important and time-consuming craft of a Viking woman, textiles. Your family needs clothes, blankets, and sails for your father's boat, and all of it must be made by hand from scratch. Your mother is a master weaver, her hands moving with practiced grace at the large warp-weighted loom that stands against one wall of the longhouse. It is a formidable piece of equipment, a tall wooden frame from which hundreds of threads hang, held taut by heavy clay or stone weights. Your job is not yet to weave, but to perform the endless preparatory tasks. Today, you're given a pile of greasy raw wool, shorn from the family's sheep last season. You must first card it, using 2 wooden paddles with sharp metal teeth to comb the fibres, pulling them apart and aligning them until the wool is a soft, airy cloud. Once the wool is carded, you must spin it into yarn. You sit on a low stool by the fire, taking a tuft of the carded wool and a drop spindle, a simple weighted stick. You expertly twist the fibres, letting the spindle drop and spin, transforming the fluffy wool into a strong, tight thread of yarn. It's a skill you've been learning since you were old enough to hold the spindle. Your fingers move automatically, your mind free to wander as you listen to the sounds of the longhouse. This process is incredibly slow. It will take you many, many hours of spinning to produce enough yarn for your mother to weave just a few inches of cloth. Every tunic your father wears, every blanket that keeps you warm at night, represents countless hours of this quiet, patient work performed by the women and girls of the household. It is the invisible economy of the Viking Age, a craft as vital as any sword or longship. As a girl, your world is largely centred on the domestic sphere, the hearth, the loom, the kitchen. Your chores are about nurturing, creating and maintaining the household. You learn to cook, to preserve food for the long winter by drying, salting or smoking fish and meat. You learn the properties of herbs, which ones can be used to flavour a stew and which can soothe a cough. You forage in the nearby woods for berries and nuts in the summer and autumn. You are responsible for mending clothes, a constant task, using a sharp bone needle, and the yarn you spun yourself to patch a tear in your brother's tunic or resew a seam on a leather shoe. You are learning the complex web of skills that will one day allow you to manage your own household. Bjorn's world, meanwhile, is oriented outward. His chores are an apprenticeship for the life of a Viking man, a farmer, a sailor, a warrior. After mucking out, he takes the sheep out to pasture, his dog at his heels, responsible for keeping them safe from wolves. He learns to use an axe, splitting logs for the fire under your father's watchful eye. His first attempts are clumsy, but with each swing, he learns the feel of the tool, the grain of the wood. He helps your father repair the longship, which is pulled ashore for the winter. He learns how to carve a new oar, how to tar the hull to keep it watertight, and how to tie the complex knots that will hold the sail fast in a storm. In the spring and summer, his days are spent in the fields, helping to plough, plant and harvest the barley and rye that will feed the family. He learns to fish, casting nets into the fjord, and how to hunt, setting snares for rabbits. His work is about strength, about providing for and protecting the family. Your chores and his are different, but they are two halves of the same whole, the interlocking gears that keep your family alive. Life is not all work, however. Learning is woven into every task, but there is also time for play, especially in the long, bright days of summer. You and the other children of the village might have running races, play games of tag among the houses, or have swimming contests in the icy fjord. Bjorn and the other boys wrestle, a favourite Viking pastime that teaches them balance, strength, and how to handle themselves in a fight. You have a few simple toys, a small wooden horse your father carved for you, a doll made of scraps of cloth, and a set of smooth, flat stones for a throwing game. Inside the longhouse during the dark winters, entertainment is quieter. Your family might play Hanafataful, a strategic board game, a contest of wits between a king and his attackers. But the most treasured form of entertainment is storytelling. As the family gathers around the fire in the evening, after the final meal of the day, your grandfather, his face a roadmap of wrinkles lit by the flickering flames, might begin to tell a story. He tells the old tales, the sagas of great heroes like Ragnar Lothbrok or Gunnar of Lidarendi. He recites the poems of the gods, of Odin, the All-Father who hung from the world tree to gain wisdom, of Thor, the mighty thunder god with his hammer, Mjolnir, and of Loki, the cunning trickster. You and Bjorn listen, captivated. These stories are not just entertainment, they are your history, your religion, your moral compass. They teach you what it means to be brave, what it means to be honourable, and what happens to those who break their oaths. They are as much a part of your education as learning to spin or wield an axe. As the story ends and the fire burns low, a comfortable silence settles over the longhouse. The animals are quiet. Your parents are speaking in low voices. You're tired, your body aching from a day of grinding, spinning and carrying. You find your place on the earthen bench that serves as your bed, pulling a heavy wool blanket over you. The smoke still hangs in the air, but it is a familiar, comforting presence. You have done your part today. You've contributed to the warmth, the food, and the clothing that will see your family through another day. You're not just a child. You're a vital part of this small, resilient world. And as you drift off to sleep to the sound of your grandfather's breathing and the gentle crackle of the last embers, you know that tomorrow, when the cold light once again finds the smoke hole in the roof, your duties will be waiting.